in this era of LinkedIn, and LinkedIn in the last 3 years has hit this whole new level. When somebody is positioning themselves to get picked up by executive search, how important is LinkedIn, and what are some of the key things they need to do to make themselves professional and ready on that level?
It needs to be clean, and it needs to tell a succinct story. So for every role that you have, give a sentence or two about what you did, and if you can measure it, ideally, measurable impact you had on the company, right? Built a product that had 250% growth over 8 months, something like that. If you've been progressively promoted, that's good. LinkedIn has its pros and cons. One of the pros it has is that it gives you the tenure of start and finish, but it can also show breakdowns by promotion, right? So individual, whatever, senior software engineer, software engineering manager, director of software engineering under one company. That shows progression over a short amount of time, hopefully. If it's 3 roles in 4 years, that's great. Have one of those roles have 2 sentences, not 6 sentences in total, because that just sort of is a little bit overkill. Make sure it's clean. You don't have to have all of your activities on there. What it is you are really good at, what you do, and what you want to do.
So you just brought up something that I think is really important, and I did an episode earlier where I really broke down that people don't tell their own story well enough, and that to tell your story in the way of quantifiable results, that has the most impact because it's succinct. The numbers really speak for themselves. They're also usually aligned with company objectives that demonstrate a level of business acumen. Like, it's packaged very neatly. You hit that 3 or 4 times. How important is that for you when somebody is transitioning to the executive level and that level of search?
I'd say that the more senior, then the more that less is more matters. Right? Because at some point, going to be quite evident. If you were a VP of engineering in a company for 6 years and that company went public 3 years into your tenure there, it's pretty obvious that you have an impact, right? The other thing too, that I've never met someone who uses the word visionary in their profile who is truly visionary. Like, you shouldn't have to say it if you aren't.
What I'm hearing is nouns, verbs, numbers. You can leave the adjectives to the side because that's the resume, the LinkedIn, that's going to get you the interview. You're going to have plenty of time to tell the stories, have the conversations in the interview, but keeping it succinct and professional, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I actually love how you phrased it. Leave the adjectives to the reader, and also avoid hyperbole.
I love it. So if LinkedIn is so important, then what should a resume be? Like, help tie this together because, there's obviously people out searching right now. We have some layoffs in the industry. LinkedIn, obviously very important, but then a resume, should that just be, like LinkedIn plus a little bit more?
Yeah, what does that you nailed it. Exactly that. It's LinkedIn plus a little more. Something that you would tell in an interview, but not, LinkedIn, right? So it's probably no more than twice the length. It's a little more illustrative, but not telling your life story during that time of your life.
Are cover letters even a thing anymore?
It's a good question. I would say sometimes. It's not typically the case, but where it does help is if it's not a linear move from point A to point B. If someone, a cover letter is saying, I saw this role that was posted, or I understand you're looking for this type of role. Here's why I think it may not be obvious, but here's why I think that I'm the right person for this job. And it may be something that you did in a job you have on LinkedIn, but to do that, try to align between the 2 points would be just too creative, right? That's when prose helps.
What about an executive or a biography? And is that something that goes into your about section in LinkedIn?
Not typically. I think, again, less is more. If there is a summary of a sentence or 2 that tells a little bit about you and what you've done. LinkedIn is a business social network. There are personal social networks, right? And so I think also distinguishing between the 2, it's totally fine at the very bottom to have hobbies, maybe you're an Eagle Scout or whatever, that's great. But I also think just keeping it about what are you ultimately trying to accomplish?
So it truly is, when you think about executive search, you want it to have a very resume type focus to it.
Yeah.
And clear and succinct.
What did you do and why did it matter?
So getting back to what you were talking about earlier, looking and following executive search firms and understanding some of their activities, virtual live activities, is really important. Is there a protocol for reaching out to create relationships with executive recruiters through LinkedIn?
Whether it's a company or an executive search firm, or frankly anything, a warm connection is always best, right? So if you have someone who can make an introduction, a warm introduction, then that is always the preferable method, right? Because there'll be some context. Someone is introduced cold, blind intros that's no bueno. That does not work. And so cold intros are not good. Cold reach outs are fine. If someone writes into an exec search firm and says, hey, I'm a director of engineering at Lyft, I would love to engage with you to look for my next role. That's fine. But someone that you mutually know, just making a cold intro is usually not the best way to do it, because you don't have any context. You don't necessarily know if that is the right person at that firm for that individual to speak with.
And so going back to the first one, what I heard was, and this was actually something that I did, is I know after we built our relationship and I got some warm handoffs to some other firms, I went in through the front door, which I think is what you're saying, is there's a way that you can go in. And I remember there was a specialized CIO search firm, same thing, where I just went in through the front door. And if you have a resume and you have a story that lines up with where you're going, they're going to reach out. Like they're trying to find a talent pool. And this is so important for people to understand that when you get to this level, leverage your relationships to get warm handoffs, number one. Number two is go in through the front door, the virtual front door of some of these organizations, because they're looking for people like you and want to build those relationships. So that's important. That's valuable.